What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another Call of Duty World War II gameplay. And today's finance talk is going to be about whether or not buying a house is right for you in your 20s. Buying a house in your 20s has always felt like a part of the American dream, and it is one of those goals that gets talked about like it's the ultimate sign that you're doing life right. You see posts on social media and people your age holding keys in front of that new house, talking about how renting is throwing money away. And it can start to feel like if you don't own a home by 25 or 30, you're somehow very far behind. Buying a house in your 20s can be an amazing move for some people, but also a really stressful financial mistake for others. And in this video, I want to walk through the real pros and cons so you can decide if homeownership in your 20s actually makes sense for your life, your finances, and your goals. I'm not here to tell you that buying is always good or renting is always bad. I want to help you think clearly about the trade offs so you can make a decision that you won't regret 5 or 10 years down the road and give you as many facts of the matter that I know. So let's get into the pros of buying a house. First, and probably the most obvious one, is that buying a house allows you to start building equity. And this is the biggest upsides to buying a home in your 20s. Instead of paying rent every month and never seeing that money again, part of your mortgage payment is actually going towards owning more of the home. And over time, that ownership slowly compounds in two ways. One, as you pay down the loan balance, and two, as the home itself increases in value. Let's walk through a realistic example so this just doesn't stay theoretical. Let's say you graduate college at 22 and you spend 3 years working and saving. And at 25, you buy a modest starter home in an everyday run of the mill, let's say Midwest city, for about $300,000. Now, I know in my city, a starter home is not $300,000, but just bear with me for this example. That's not a luxury house by any means, and that's a pretty normal entry level home price in a lot of markets today, but not all markets. So let's just assume you put 10% down, so $30,000, and you take out a $270,000 mortgage. With today's interest rates being roughly in the 6.5 to 7.5 range, depending on your credit and the market, your monthly payment is going to feel pretty high. And early on, most of that payment is actually going towards interest, not principal. I'm going to show you a typical chart for paying off houses here, and you guys have probably seen this. But again, yeah, when you first get a mortgage, most of your payment is really going to knocking down that interest. That's the part that people don't always realize. In the first few years of the mortgage, you're really not building equity fast through your payments alone. You might only be paying down a few $1,000s in principal per year at the beginning. So, on the surface, that doesn't sound life changing. You didn't magically pay off half your house in 5 years. But this is why I always say that equity is a slow burn early on, and it's more of a long term play than an instant win. But the other part of this is where house appreciation can also work in your favor. If that same $300,000 home grows at about 4% a year, which is roughly in line with the long term average home appreciation in most markets, after 5 years, that home is worth closer to now $365,000. And after 10 years, that same house would be worth $444,000. So now let's zoom out and think about what actually happened here over your first decade of home ownership in the theoretical example I'm giving. Over 10 years, you slowly started paying your mortgage down, and let's say your remaining loan balance could be, $230,000 or around $240,000, depending on your exact terms. Meanwhile, the home itself has grown into value around $440,000. That means that your equity position isn't just your original down payment. It's a combination of your home's value increasing and the loan you've paid down. In this rough example, you could be sitting on something like $200,000 in home equity by your mid 30s or late 30s because you bought a house at a relatively young age and gave the asset time to grow while slowly chipping away at that loan. Now, these house appreciation numbers are not guaranteed, just like how market returns are not guaranteed, and this is definitely not fast money. You actually make less over time in home appreciation than you would, say, investing in the S&P 500. Home appreciations have averaged about 4 to 5% per year, while the S&P 500 has averaged about 10% a year. There will be years where the home market is flat, and in the early years of your mortgage, your equity is going to just build really slowly. There may be even periods where your home price pulls back. But over long stretches of time, owning a home early in your 20s gives you the runway for that slow, boring, and powerful combination of appreciation plus principal down payment to start building up your net worth. The second big pro to buying a house is that it gives you both stability in your housing cost and a built in forced way to build wealth over time. which is something a lot of people underestimate when they experience it firsthand. When you lock in a fixed mortgage rate of, let's say 15 or 30-year mortgage, your payment doesn't reset every time your lease would be up like you would see in an apartment. You're not exposed to annual rent increases that can slowly squeeze your budget over time. Meanwhile, rents tend to go up almost everywhere over long periods of time. Even if the increases feel small year after year, over a 5 or 10 year window, those rent prices are pretty noticeable now. And suddenly, that apartment that you felt like was affordable in your mid 20s starts to feel less affordable in your early 30s, even though your living situation hasn't changed at all. In some markets, this stability alone is a meaningful benefit. Knowing what your core housing payment is going to be each month makes budgeting easier, planning easier, and mentally removes a layer of financial uncertainty with your housing payment. Then you don't have to constantly be doing the math whether you can afford to stay in the apartment that you're in or you need to move again. And moving is such a pain in the ass. I've moved 5 times over the last 4 years, and it also is kind of expensive nowadays, so those moving costs just can quickly add up on you. Another benefit of owning a home is that mortgage quietly acts like a forced savings plan. Every single month, even if you're not feeling particularly motivated to save, part of your payment is just building equity in the house. You're slowly converting a portion of your income into an asset that you own instead of it all disappearing into a rent payment that only benefits the property owner. Owning a house creates a form of automatic wealth building that doesn't rely entirely on discipline, timing the market, or perfectly optimizing every financial decision that you make. You're building net worth in the background simply by paying for the place that you live in. Another real benefit of owning a home is the level of control and personal ownership you get over your living situation, which is something you don't fully appreciate until you've spent years living under somebody else's rules. When you own the place that you live in, you're not just occupying the space, you're shaping it to what makes it special for you. You can paint the walls the way you want to paint them, remodel that kitchen that's outdated, turn a spare bedroom into a home office or a gym, and finally, maybe get that dog you've been putting off because your lease doesn't allow pets. And over time, that personal connection to your home can become just more than convenience. If you start a family, or even settle into a rhythm in one city, a home can turn into a place where a lot of meaningful memories get built. There's also a quieter kind of stability that comes with owning a home, especially if you're in a season of life where you know you're not planning to move around much. You're not at the mercy of a landlord deciding when to sell the property, when to raise the rent, or when to end the lease because they want the unit back. You have more control over how long you stay, how settled you become, and how rooted you allow yourself to be in one place when you're owning a home. The idea of homeownership being a milestone is deeply baked into American culture as well. For decades, owning a home has been part of what people think of as the American dream. And whether that framing is fair or outdated, a lot of people still feel a sense of pride and personal accomplishment the first time they buy a place on their own. But as real as these emotional lifestyle benefits can be, they don't tell the full story. And in the next part of this video, I'm going to walk you through the downsides of owning a home, because a lot of people in their 20s, those trade offs matter just as much, and if not more, than the upside of owning a home. One of the biggest downsides of buying a house, specifically in your early to mid 20s, is the opportunity cost lost compared to just investing that money. Every dollar you put into a down payment on a new home, closing cost, furniture, renovations, and that random expense that comes up with moving into a home means that those dollars are taken away potentially from going into your 401k, your Roth IRA, your brokerage account, or even building a larger emergency fund that gives you more flexibility earlier in your career. Now, if you can go buy a home and hit all of these investing goals, props to you. But for most people in their early to mid 20s, that's not the case. To put this into a realistic terms, let's say you spend your early 20s saving aggressively, and by 25, you built up $40,000 for that hypothetical down payment and closing costs you would need for a house. Now, that's a huge win, and it takes discipline to do that. But for that same $40,000, if invested in your early 20s and left alone for 30 or 40 years, has an incredible amount of time to compound for you. If you invested that $40,000 into a broad market index fund and it earned an average of around 10% per year over the long run, that money alone could grow into several $100,000 by the time you're in your 60s without you even adding another dollar to it. That's the power of time in the market when you start young. Now, when you put that money into a house, you're not lighting it on fire. You're converting cash into home equity, which can still grow over time through appreciation and principal paydown, but the growth profile is different on this one. That money becomes tied up in a single asset of a home that generally grows slower than a diversified stock portfolio over long periods of time, and you can't easily access it without selling or borrowing against the house. There's also the second order of effect that's easy to miss here, and when your monthly housing bills and maintenance costs go up because now you own a home, that extra pressure can make it harder to invest aggressively during a period of life in your 20s where investing habits matter a lot. If your mortgage, taxes, insurance, and maintenance eat up a big chunk of your income in your 20s, you might delay maxing out a Roth IRA, you might put less into your 401k, or you might skip investing altogether for a few years just to stay comfortable. Those missed early years of investing can quietly cost you more in the long term growth than people realize, because those are the years when compound growth has the longest runway for you. Now, that doesn't mean buying a home in your 20s is just instantly a bad investment. I'm not saying that at all. For the right person in the right situation, it can still be a smart move, both financially and emotionally. But it does mean there's a real trade off happening in the background. You're choosing to allocate a large amount of your early financial firepower into real estate instead of into investments that can compound more aggressively for you. That trade off is easy to overlook because homeownership feels productive and responsible, even when it might be slowing down another part of your financial life that benefits most from being prioritized early. Now, again, I'm going to say this, if you can own a home and prioritize investments, then you're killing it and keep doing what you're doing. Another major downside, especially for people buying homes in their 20s, is the risk of what's commonly called being house poor. And this usually happens when someone buys the most expensive house they can technically qualify for on paper, even if that payment stretches their monthly budget thin in real life. Just because a bank says you can afford a certain mortgage payment doesn't mean that the payment fits comfortably in your lifestyle. Lenders are looking at ratios and formulas, not whether you still have room in your budget. When a large portion of your income goes towards housing, it quietly limits your flexibility in ways that you don't always show up immediately. On the surface, you might be making those house payments just fine, but underneath all that, you're constantly making budget trade offs. I'll give some examples here. You could feel pressure to stay in a job you've outgrown or actively dislike because you can't afford a temporary dip in your income because you got to afford that house. You might pass up on opportunities that could help move your long term career, but the short term financial risk feels too scary with a big mortgage hanging over your head. Instead of investing consistently, you might tell yourself you'll start later once things feel more comfortable. And you might not have a big enough emergency fund built, and that smaller buffer could come back to haunt you quicker than you know it. And you're just hoping nothing breaks in that house. Another major downside of buying a home in your 20s is how much it can quietly lock you into both a location and a financial commitment at a stage of life that's usually defined by a lot of change. Your 20s are often a decade where a lot is still in motion for you. You might switch jobs, move cities for better opportunities, go back to school, change career paths entirely, or realize that the lifestyle that you thought you wanted at 22 doesn't actually fit you at 27. That kind of flexibility is a huge asset early in your adult life, and owning a home can make exercising that flexibility much harder. When you buy a house, you're tying yourself to a specific place in a way that renting simply doesn't. If a great job opportunity pops up in another city, or you decide that you want to relocate for a different lifestyle, selling a house is not a quick or simple decision. It's expensive, time consuming, emotionally draining, and depending on the market, you might not even be able to sell on your own timeline without taking a financial hit. That can lead to a situation where you stay in a place you've outgrown, not because you wanted to, but because moving feels financially painful. At that same time, buying a home comes with much heavier financial footprint than most people expect, and that footprint can just amplify the feeling of being financially trapped. What do I mean by this? It's not just the monthly mortgage payment. There's the down payment, the closing costs, the inspections, the appraisal fees. I could go on and on. HOA fees, taxes, insurance. All those costs stack up on each other, and they don't always show up in a neat, predictable spreadsheet in monthly amounts. When you rent and something breaks, you call the landlord and go about your day. When you own, that broken water heater, the roof issue, that HVAC failure becomes your responsibility, and those problems tend to always show up at the worst possible times. A single major repair can wipe out months of savings or force you to take on debt, which adds another layer of stress on top of an already expensive commitment. You might, again, find yourself putting off investing, delaying other big goals, and saying no to opportunities that can move your life forward simply because you're locked into a house and you're tied up maintaining this house and just staying in one place. So while homeownership can feel like a step forward on paper in your 20s, it can also narrow your options at a stage of life where having many options is often one of the most valuable things that you can give yourself. So, to sum it all up, should you buy a house in your 20s? The answer depends far more on your current life situation than on your age. Buying a house in your 20s can be a great move if your life is relatively stable, you have a clear sense of where you want to live for the next several years, maybe next decades. You've built a real good emergency fund, you're not carrying a lot of high interest credit card debt, and you can comfortably afford the home without stretching your budget thin. In that scenario, homeownership can provide stability, a sense of rootedness, and a slow, steady, good way to build net worth and wealth over time. But it's probably not a great move to own a home if your life is still very much moving around in motion. If you're early in your career, unsure about where you want to be or where you want to live long term, and you're open to moving for better opportunities, or still trying to figure out what lifestyle fits you, then tying yourself to one location and buying a home and making such a large financial commitment can quietly limit your options. The real goal in your 20s shouldn't be able to check the home ownership box as fast as possible. The real goal is to build financial stability, grow your earning potential, learn how to invest consistently, and create that financial flexibility later on in your life. So that when you do decide to buy a home, it's a confident decision that fits the life you've built instead of a rushed decision driven by the social pressure or fear of missing out. So if you're thinking about buying a house soon, drop a comment below and let me know what's making you consider it and what you're most unsure about. If this video helped you think more clearly about the trade-offs of home ownership, hit that like button so this reaches more people who are trying to make smarter money decisions in their 20s. And if you want more realistic personal finance content, go ahead and subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next one.